Hi, everybody, and welcome to another session of In Conversation with Graeme Codrington. It's wonderful to have you along again, and I see a few of you are already ahead of me today. If this is your first time in a webinar jam, you might want to just familiarize yourself, and the best place to do that is over to your right-hand side, or if you're on a phone, just flick up, left, right, whatever you have to do to get to the chat box, and then come and introduce yourself and just say hi. Evan, you've been on quite a lot of the webinars. You joined us first this afternoon and said hi. Welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Today I'm talking to Andy Bounds. Now, Andy and I think, met face-to-face for the first time 2 or 3 years ago at a national sales convention in the UK and shared the stage there. But what Andy probably doesn't know is that I've been stalking him for probably a decade or more. He's been an inspiration to me in terms of how you communicate online, how you communicate in general, and just the way he positions the work that he does online. Andy, it's really great to be chatting to you, and thank you for your time this afternoon. How are you handling lockdown? What does lockdown look like for you and your family?
Well, thanks, Graeme. It's great to be here. Probably similar to many people, it's different than it was. So what worked perfectly 3 months ago doesn't work anymore. So we have to adjust. But I'm really enjoying it. I've actually been working from home because I know we travel all over the world normally, but we sort of work from home really. So I've been doing this for 17 years. So I'm finding I'm okay with this, but a lot of my customers aren't. So they need a bit of help and a bit of guidance and all that stuff. But it's fine. It's good.
Yeah, I think, Andy, you and I are in exactly the same position. When we're home, we work from home and we've got offices set up at home, and then we travel around the world speaking at conferences and working with our clients. So as you say, we kind of used to this, and I keep trying to tell my clients now, it's brilliant, actually. I think we're in the middle of the greatest experiment in the future of work ever undertaken, and I think some people are going to enjoy it more than they imagined they would. I certainly do. I've worked from home about the same length of time as you have, and I love it. So all good from our side. Hey,
cool. Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know Andy, Andy is a communications expert, maybe more than anything else. And he helps people to communicate better. And wherever that is valuable, Andy is able to then put applications specifically into different parts of business, whether it's sales, which is quite a lot of the work that he does, or just communication in general, internal and external. And every Tuesday, his Tips newsletter is one of the highlights of my week. We share it often around with our team because he just has a way of helping you to just crystallize what it is you're trying to say, how you're going to get that message across, whether it's helping you to improve your meetings or your emails or your sales communication. Andy, you've really helped me over the years. What would you say is the importance of communication during a time of crisis? Does it get more important, less important? What are you seeing from some of your clients at the moment in terms of communication?
So, it's always super important, communication. The only time communication is not relevant is if you're on your own and you think of an idea on your own that you never tell anybody about ever. So that doesn't happen very often. So communication is always kind of important, but it really is now. A lot of my background and my interest and my passion for this stems from my mum. My mum's blind. So when I was learning to speak, when I was a 2-3-year-old little boy, the person who told me to speak can't see. Well, now as we live in lockdown, nobody can see anybody anymore. You can't meet face to face. So the skills I learned as a child are really quite useful to my customers. And the general rule with communication is this: it's always important, but it really is now. And if when you're in the workplace, variety is thrust upon you, whether you like it or not. You'll hear a conversation over there. You'll hear somebody laugh over there. Somebody will interrupt you, which might be annoying, but it forces variety on you. But now we're sat at home looking at our computer. Some people aren't used to this, and all of a sudden 8 hours have gone and they've just sat there looking at the computer because no variety is thrust on us. So we have to be proactive with our communication to inject variety with other people, but also to give ourselves variety. Or if you're not careful, it's just Groundhog Day and you go through again and again. And that's just not sustainable.
I agree with you completely. For the first few weeks of lockdown, I kind of just let all of my days merge into one. I didn't have sort of any rhythms and rituals, just allowed the work to flow across into the weekend. And I think a lot of people did that. And 2 or 3 weeks ago, I kind of just realized I'm not going to be able to sustain this. It just doesn't feel natural. And so I've now forced myself to try and look for rhythms again. In terms of the way that the day works, the week works, even monthly rhythms. I think, this COVID is going to be with us for a while. Even if it's not just lockdown, we're going to be disrupted for a while. So I think we've got to find those new rhythms. What are you hearing from some of your clients or some of the people that you work with regularly? What are some of the challenges that people are facing due to whether it's lockdown or not, just the disruption we've had in the workplace?
Okay, so there's two main ones I'm finding. One of them is what we're now calling Zoom doom, where everyone knows what they used to do. Just as you said before with the rhythm, everyone knew their old rhythm and they didn't sort of know the new rhythm, and they're trying to cut and paste their old life into the new life, and it doesn't quite work. It's like sometimes you see people, so I'm a communication nerd, so I always use communication examples. It's like someone who does a Word document and someone says, oh, put that on PowerPoint, and they cut and paste it in PowerPoint and they end up with crappy slides because it's just a Word document, and then you watch the presenter read it out and you think, it doesn't work there. What worked there doesn't work here. So that's one of the challenges. And the other one is this, the phrase working from home. I mean, I think we've already said the phrase working from home, but so many people think they're working from home, but actually they're just living in work. So what used to be a lovely home has now become work. They wake up thinking about work. They do work too late. They don't have compartmentalized areas like in the house where they can't talk about work, or times when they can't talk about work. So we have a very simple rule in our house. I'm very lucky. I have a study, and when the door's shut, the kids can't come in because daddy's working. But equally, I'm not allowed to talk about work upstairs. We're not allowed smartphones in the bedroom. If I happen to be doing work downstairs and a child comes in the room, they have to stop work. So you have to have the rules, because otherwise you don't quite get your home life right, and you don't quite get your work life right, and all your communications get jumbled up, and it's really disconcerting,
Yeah. I think it's even worse than that. I think a lot of people are trying to survive a crisis while stuck at home. And that's very different from working from home, right? I mean, working from home, like you and me, we've got these offices set up. We've probably negotiated some of these rules with our families over time. Probably didn't get them right. Probably don't always get them right, but at least we've had experience. A lot of people have just been thrust into these circumstances, and I think are just floundering a little bit. So what would be some really cool advice? And Annie, I've really been excited to talk to you, because I know you have a passion for bringing everything down to just practical nuggets of wisdom to help people. And please, anybody who's watching this, if you haven't subscribed to Andy's newsletter, pop along to his website, andybounds.com, sign up for the newsletter. I promise you it'll be a highlight of your week. But give us some of the nuggets that you've maybe shared over the last 2 weeks, Andy, with just what people can do while they're in a crisis, especially around communication.
Okay, cool. Right, so here we go. So I'm just going to fly through any, and feel free to interrupt me at any point, Graeme. Okay? So firstly, when you communicate with people who you communicate with regularly, like your team or your close colleagues, a good rule of thumb with communication is double the frequency and half the duration. So if you are used to having a 1 hour update once a week, maybe have half an hour update every half a week, or 10 minutes every day. So frequency is good, but you don't want to drown them in noise. So double frequency, half the duration is a good idea. And people want to know what's going on in other people's lives. But if you have an update meeting, we've all been on those where we thought, well, there's an hour of my life I won't get back, because they can be quite boring. So instead of doing update, here's a really handy little trick. What I call it is best next help. So if Graeme, if you and I were having a quick update, rather than using the word update, I say to you, right, Graeme, give me your best next help. And you would say, okay, Andy, best thing I've achieved since we last spoke was this. Next thing I'm planning to do this week is this. And the one thing I could really do with some help with is this. So you can cover those 3 things in like 10 seconds. I do my 3 things in 10 seconds, and we're 20 seconds in, and we can both learn from each other's bests, make sure we're both happy with the nexts, and we can then help each other out. So imagine with your team, if you like double the frequency and halve the duration, and when you do speak, you include a best next help, it means you're learning from each other, you're aligning, but also you're helping each other. Other things that are so important with communication, the golden rule with communication is you've got to get your beginning and your end right. So your beginning has got to be engaging. So if you send me an email called FYI, I'm already bored because I don't want to read anything called FYI. Invite me to a meeting called update, I might be late. But if we can make something engaging to start with, people engage. And I'll talk about how to do that in a second. And at the end, you always need to have a call to action, because if you don't ask someone to do anything, they won't do anything. So let's take it outside corporate life to start with, and then we'll put it inside corporate life. If I want child 4, we don't give them names anymore with my kids. There's too many of them. So if I want child 4 to go to bed, I have to engage him to start with. So I can't say go to bed because he's a 7-year-old boy. It won't work. So I engage him by saying, right, child 4, we're going to have a race. And he gets all excited. And then I say, so last one upstairs stinks, go. And he'll go upstairs. So I've started engaging because I've said the word race. And I end with a call to action, which is go. And so that is really good communicating. Now let's go in a corporate setting. If you're sending a proposal to someone, you start with an engaging thing. So if you are writing to someone and all they want to do is export into the country of Belgium, then don't call your proposal our proposal because it's boring. Instead, you call it proposal, how will help you export into Belgium. So you engage people by saying what they find engaging. And then at the end of a proposal, you want the call to action, which is to accept this proposal. You sign page 3 and send it back to me. Now, I know it sounds really obvious, but most proposals in corporate land have a boring title like our proposal. And at the end, are rather weak. Thank you for taking the time to read this. Instead of saying, you want to get into Belgium, so sign page 3. You want a race, so let's go upstairs. If you're sending an email to someone, I sent an email to one of my customers. I wanted to know a date for a webinar. So I just called it next week's webinar - a quick question ... So that went in the subject line. I didn't just call it next week's webinar. I call it next week's webinar - a quick question. So if you get that as an email line, you think, oh, how engaging. Wonder what the question is. And it's quick. I'll open it up. And then you open the email. Very quick question. Please, can you hit reply and confirm the date of the webinar? And then I can make sure it's in my diary. And so by doing that, it's clear up front the engaging thing, because I say the word quick question. And at the bottom, I say, please hit reply and do this. Now, I know this sounds obvious, Graeme, but how many times do we see a webinar? Slide 1 is called update, and slide 10 says, thank you. Well, thank you doesn't ask anyone to do anything. So everyone just says, you're welcome, goodbye, and no one does anything.
And there's no call to action. Now, we have actually a few questions coming through. Those of you who have joined us live, you can ask us any questions. And as you've heard already, Andy is also super practical. So even if you want to ask very practical questions, go for it. Andy's a fount of inspiration on these things. Steve, was it Steve? Yeah, Steve Payne has asked, surely we should also not be starting our emails with, I hope you're doing well in these turbulent times, or something like that. You know, how do you avoid going into cliche? I know I've probably said new normal way often than I should have already. I'm assuming those are not good for communication, are they?
No, they're not. It's a really good question, Steve. I mean, the way to look at this is the most important thing with an email is the title, because the way people read emails is they read the sender's name to start with. So if you get an email from Dr. Graeme Codrington, you're all over that because he's so important. So you open it, whatever his email title is. But if you get an email from a stranger, the only thing you'll do is you'll look at the title, and based on the title, you'll open it or you won't. So get your title good, and the simplest way to do that is call it what you were going to call it and just put quick question or good news or something to get them to open it. And then underneath, Steve, all I would do is after you said, hello, Andy, do a quick sentence or phrase which is polite, but try to make it not sound, I hope you are doing well in these troubled times. So, because you need to be polite and personable, but then you want to get into the body of the email. So if I was emailing Graeme, I would just say, hi, Graeme, I hope you and your family are well, and then I'm off and running. because that sounds more like me. And the point I think you're making there, Steve, is if you write in corporate language, I hate corporate language. If you want, I'll have a rant about it. I hate it. So when people write, they often say things like, prior to the commencement of. I mean, you would never say that. If you were talking, you would just say before. So I trust these email finds you well in these troubled times. You would never say that. So just write what you would say. Hi, Graeme. I hope you and your family are well. And then just crack on.
And I know you are passionate about helping people to get their meetings right, whether it's just team meetings or staff meetings. What do we need to be thinking about when we're doing that in a virtual space now? Because they're bad enough face-to-face. Are there any tips or tricks for virtual meetings?
Yeah, absolutely. So those things I said before will help with many meetings. So double the frequency, halve the duration. If it's an update meeting with your team, go best next help. That's miles better than update. But the other thing that you've got to spend much more time on the agenda. I mean, people should do this anyway, but they really should do it now. So most agendas I see are quite boring, and they're also quite meandering. And I'll tell you for why, Graeme. Firstly, remember I said you want the beginning and the end to be interesting. So the title of your meetings have got to be interesting. The simplest way to get your titles right is you think, what outcome do I want from this meeting? So if I was having a meeting with you, Graeme, I wouldn't call it meeting, because that's not very interesting. And I wouldn't call it update meeting, because that's just made it worse. So I think, what are the outcomes from this meeting? And outcomes will usually be one of two words beginning with A. Not always, but usually. Either you have a meeting with someone because you want to trigger some action, or you have a meeting with someone because you want to make some decisions. So you're looking for some agreement. So it's agreement or action. So if you titled the meeting, that's no good. If you call it meeting to agree our priorities for next month, then that way the people come to the meeting knowing what the outcome of the meeting is. So too often with agendas, people don't put the outcome in the agenda. They call it meeting, and then they use in the agenda what I call input words. They say, we're going to discuss topic X. We're going to review. We're going to update. But you see, the trouble with a discussion is I don't know what the end of a discussion is. If I tell you I'm on a diet, hopefully the end of that is I lose weight. So you know that diet equals weight loss, hopefully. If I tell you I'm revising for some exams, well, you know the outcome of a revision, hopefully, is I successfully pass the exams. But if I tell you I'm having a discussion, I've no idea what the outcome of that is. How do you know when a discussion is finished? You don't. So you'll just keep on discussing it. So it's really important always, but particularly in today's virtual world, that you're crystal clear what the outcome is. So don't have an agenda item which has the word discuss in it. Instead, you might call it agree our main priority with Project X, or identify next month's actions with or decide if we're doing Project Z or not. So if you set your agenda up with what the outcomes are, then people know where they're going. And as the old saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, you'll probably end up somewhere else. So the word discuss means it'll meander, whereas the word agree means you go straight there.
Now, this is probably an obvious question, but I must say that it was you who helped me to kind of get this right, because the point you're making there seems entirely obvious when you think about it. And then I began to analyze some of the agenda items that we put down for meetings. And even honestly, while we're talking now, in 2 hours' time, we have a team meeting with our team. And I'm thinking I've made this mistake again, because we have discuss words rather than agree. What happens if you don't know what the outcome is?
Good question.
Should you then not have the meeting, or does that indicate there's more work to be done?
Yeah, you should have the meeting, but what I call that then is discussion. I might put the word discussion in, but I don't leave it there. So I say a discussion to agree next steps or to identify our priorities. In other words, I have to be clear why we're doing this thing at all. Yeah. Because for example, when I go and do a presentation, I've got lovely slides and I'm waving my arms around and all that stuff. There are sometimes you do a presentation and you don't know what the actions are going to be because it's going to be decided in the meeting. So rather than having a final slide that says next steps, we're doing X, Y, Z, my final slide just says next steps in big letters with a question mark after it. Yeah. And so that way, when I get to the end of the presentation or the webinar, I say, so given what we've just talked about, what should our next steps be?
Yeah.
But can you see that if you call it thank you, or if you call it any questions, there won't be any next steps. So by all means, don't not have the meeting, but you still have to make sure you're progressing during the meeting. Otherwise, there's no point in having it.
I also think I've seen a lot of people just scheduling meetings because either that was the rhythm they used to have, and so they're just doing something because it's what they used to do, or they're doing it in order to look busy. In other words, now that we're all at home and my boss can't see how much effort I'm putting in, let's set up a meeting where I can just check in with my boss. If it was a 10-minute check-in, that's probably a good thing to do. But if it turns into a typical, Outlook meeting request, default setting 1 hour, people tend to fill an hour, right? If you've allocated an hour, you fill the hour.
Yeah.
So again, I suppose what we're saying to people is, during this time of disruption, don't just do what you were always doing. Think through the value of each and everything you do, especially your communications. Maybe there's a different way to do them now.
Yeah, and almost always there will be. And I love the way you said that. I keep going back to this phrase, sorry for being so boring, about like double the frequency, halve the duration. By all means, if you want an update with your boss, fine. But don't just put it as 1 hour, because that's what Outlook is split into. That is a ridiculous reason for deciding the length of a conversation. And again, depending on your boss, the idea of best next help might be quite good, because your boss wants to know what you're doing, what's working, what's not, if you want any help. So it keeps it nice and easy. The fact is, we have to change. But also, because we don't have this variety thrust on us, another thing I find is very important for mental health is proactively stimulating variety. So in my calendar, this sounds a little bit daft, in my calendar, I never have 1 hour meetings ever. Like I try and get them 20 minutes, or if they have to be longer, 40 minutes, never 1 hour or never 30 minutes. And then what I do is I always make sure within each hour, I have at least 5 minutes, which is not work. So I'm very lucky, I have a garden. I might walk around the garden, and there's a comedian I quite like. So I go on YouTube and watch him for 5 minutes. Or I stand up and sit down, or I go and see the children, or whatever it might be. I have to proactively stimulate variety, because my office won't give it me. It just won't give it me. Your office won't give you variety. So unless you proactively stimulate it, your life becomes unvaried. And that's fine for a week or two, but it is not for a month or two or a quarter or two. You've got to proactively stimulate it.
And look, certainly from the work our team is doing at Tomorrow Today, we're seeing that regardless of what the government regulations might be in whatever country you're in, the disruption that COVID is bringing is probably going to last well into 2021. Schools are going to be disrupted for a while, so that's going to impact parents with school-going kids. Many of us are going to be nervous of getting into public transport if we don't need to, and certainly we're not going to be cramming into it at rush hour every morning and evening. So there's at least going to be flexible time, probably a lot more working from home. So yeah, this idea of variety is important, isn't it? To kind of make sure that we're healthy, not just physically, but also mentally and emotionally and psychologically healthy.
Sure. Yeah. And I quite like that. This best next help, which I keep banging on about. I mean, I find this works really well just for me at the end of the day, just again for mental health. So before I finish each day, I have what I call 5 at 5, where I spend 5 minutes at 5 o'clock just thinking, what was my best thing today? What my next thing I'm doing tomorrow? And what one thing could I do with help? And also when I think of help, I also think, what one extra thing can I do to help other people? So at the end of each day, best thing, next thing, what help do I need? What help do they need? And that's it's only 5 minutes, Graeme. It's not a big ask, but every day without fail, I can celebrate success. I can look forward to tomorrow. I can ask for help and I can give help. Well, that's all right if we can do that every day.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. I'm going to start that today. Andy, we've only got a few minutes left. Everybody, if you have questions, come in with your questions. We've had 2 questions here, Andy, that I'm not sure we can answer in too much detail. Ian Burns asks us about eye contact, making eye contact. You might have an interesting take on this, coming from the situation you had with a blind mum.
Sure.
I mean, how important is eye contact? How do we keep it up? And is it as important in a virtual environment?
Yeah, eye contact's always important. And it's a strange one here, because as I look at my computer screen here, hopefully, Graeme, I'm looking at you, but actually I'm not looking at you because you're here, whereas my camera is there.
I've got the same problem, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So it's a strange thing. I have to look at the white dot on top of my computer because eye contact is always good. That sometimes people have a setup where they have a screen over here and they have a camera over here. Eye contact is always a good thing. So you always want to make sure you're looking at where the camera is. Now, I have a slightly challenge with this because I've inherited some stuff from my mum, and I'm actually blind in one eye. And I remember that a girlfriend of mine, when I was about 13 or 14, said, "Why do you always look at my nose?" And I said, like, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, what you're doing is, because you've got one eye, you're compensating and going in the middle. But I don't have any eyes there. So every time I'm talking to you, I sort of feel like I'm trying to do this." So she said, if you think about it, your right eye should look in my left eye. So when I talk to people, I can only see their left eye. It's a strange thing. So yeah, eye contact's good, Ian. It's a great question, but look at the camera, don't look at the screen.
And then where was it here? Alan asked about maximizing LinkedIn. Is that something that you have a look at in terms of written communications and profiles and things like that? What advice could we give for social media, LinkedIn?
Sure. So here are some quick ones. Again, normal rules, Graeme, interrupt me. So number one, go on the social media platform where the people you want to speak to are. So my clients go on LinkedIn. They don't particularly use I can't even Snapchat. I don't think any of them have heard of that.
TikTok.
Yes, that's right. So just don't go there, and don't think, "Oh, I've heard of a new one, I'll just leap over there." So go where your clients go. And then there are two things that are very important. Number one, contribute good stuff. So you don't have to originate it all, but if you find something useful, then share a post. You want people to want to go on your profile. I post stuff pretty much every day. A lot of it I create, but sometimes I just will follow someone else and say, "Have a look at this, it's good." But the other way to use LinkedIn, as well as generating good stuff, is use it to help yourself reach out to people you want to speak to. So let's say you want to speak to Graeme, but you don't know Graeme. If you go on Graeme's LinkedIn profile, the first thing I suggest you do is look at what LinkedIn calls mutual connections. That's people who are linked into both you and Graeme. Now, if you don't know Graeme, if you go on mutual connections, you'll find someone who knows you and Graeme, and then you can go to the mutual connection and say, "Would you mind introducing me to Graeme?" And it's a very simple way of getting to speak to someone who's a stranger to you. Another thing you can do if you want to speak to Graeme, but you don't really know him, if you don't want to go on mutual connections, go on Graeme's posts and find something he's written and then send him a direct message based on what he's written. So I might message Graeme saying, "I've got a quick question about the post you wrote yesterday called this." And then Graeme's going to open it up, because why does anybody post anything on LinkedIn? Because they want people to read it. So the two rules with LinkedIn: number one, communicate out good stuff. And number two, if you want to go into someone else, either use the mutual connection or find a post they've written that you want to pass a comment on. And that makes it better than just aggregating loads of leads for no point.
Mm-hmm. So, Annie, let's use the last few minutes to just segue a little bit into specific sales communication advice for people. And I can throw two questions and then just let you go as well. Give us some sales communication advice. So obviously, sales at the moment needs to have some kind of empathy layer over it, that it doesn't sometimes have. Karen has asked about, what about people who are anxious? Is there anything particularly you can do to communicate empathy? And then Steve asks about having a look at the fact that people are going to be stressed a little bit in terms of their income, and how do you sell things that might be considered either luxury or big ticket items that maybe people are going to say, maybe I'm not going to be purchasing that. Is there any way that you can kind of break through that? Very specific question, but I think it leads into a general question about, are there any particular communication bits of advice that might be really helpful during the COVID crisis?
Sure, yeah. So the first thing to say, the common answer to both Karen and Steve's question is a lot of success in sales always has come from, and certainly does now, with your ability to ask great questions. So all the best salespeople I've met, and it's been a lot of them, are all really good at asking questions. So they don't say things like, what keeps you awake at night? And how are you doing? And stuff that we hear all the time. Instead, they ask really good questions that gets the other person thinking. And the great thing about that, if you ask great questions in answer to Karen's question, it's a good way to be empathetic. And if you ask Steve's, to answer Steve's question, if you're selling a luxury item or indeed any item, asking good questions might well uncover the need for it. So the golden rule of asking questions in sales is this: you never lead with your product, you lead people towards your product. So you don't lead with your product, you lead people towards your product. So, for example, one of the things I'm doing a lot of at the minute is webinars to help people sell more stuff. So when I'm talking to a potential customer, I don't say, hello, potential customer, would you like to buy a webinar? Because yes, that's a question, but I'm leading with my product. So instead, I've carefully sat down and thought of a good question which shows empathy and helps people if they're stressed. And the question I might ask is, so you know this lockdown we're experiencing, what impact is that having on your business? How's it affecting your sales? So I'm not saying the word webinar at all. I'm just saying this lockdown, how's it affecting you? And if you ask a question like that, the answer is either going to be really well, actually, or yeah, not much different, or really badly. So if you ask a question like that, they're going to say, well, yeah, or badly. And then I can just say, I'm pleased to hear that, or really, or I'm sorry to hear that. And then I can say, tell me a bit more. And so coming up with a couple of really good questions like, how's this lockdown affecting your sales? And then tell me a bit more about that. That's great for building empathy. You're certainly not shoving a luxury product down someone's face, but you started a conversation. So another example is one of our customers sells, get this, cyber risk insurance. Now, that's not the sort of thing you think, oh, I must buy that during a lockdown. So if you said, would you like any cyber risk insurance? People would just go, no, lockdown. So instead, we reframed the question and said, can I just ask a quick question? Heaven forbid, during this lockdown, if you had a malicious cyber attack, what are the first two things you'd do while everyone's working remotely to keep you safe? Now, if the customer knows the answer to that, you say, great, tell me more. If they go, yeah, you could go, tell me more. And if they go, I've no idea, you can say, oh, second question, if this happened and you didn't really know what to do, what impact might that have on your customers? I'm just asking because this is my job to make sure our customers are safe. I'm just asking. And then the customers like hopefully answer it. And then, and this is the great phrase, you might want to write this down, anyone. What you then do is you then use this phrase, which is, you sound like Frank. And the customer says, who's Frank? And you go, oh, he's one of my customers. And then you start telling a story. So very quick example. How's the lockdown affecting your sales? Not very well, really. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Tell me more. Blah, blah, blah. And then what happened? Blah, blah, blah. Really? And then what? Blah, blah, blah. Do you know what? You sound just like Frank. Who's Frank? Well, I had this self-same conversation with someone called Frank at the beginning of April. And since then, he's made £1 million of sales. Would you mind if I share with you what I shared with Frank? Because it might help you. Now, this is really good empathetic stuff because it's been led by them, but it's not real. It's been led by my questions. And I followed it and I said, tell me more, blah, blah, blah. Then when I said, you sound like Frank, it was the customer who said, who's Frank? And then even then, I didn't shove my products down the neck. I said, would you be interested in telling you what I told Frank? So it's a really nice, gentle way to do it. If you want a simple way to remember all this rant, Graeme, just remember ABC. A, you ask questions. B, you build certainty by saying, you sound like Frank. And then C, hopefully you close it off by saying, would you like me to help you as well? So hopefully that ABC answer answers both Karen's question and also Steve's as well.
I think that's brilliant. And Andy, it sounds like a lot of the stuff that you help your clients with every single day is just as important as it always was. I suppose the difference now with lockdown and COVID is that everybody's just been overwhelmed with a tsunami of information. because everything's now just coming. It's all coming through your inbox. There's just noise everywhere. And of course, because everybody's scrambling to try and sell their products, there's just so much noise in the system. For me, clear communication is what cuts through that noise. And I think some of the things that you've said to us today, some of the insights people can get on your website or by connecting with you are really going to be helpful. So if you are with us live, I've put Andy's website into the chat. If you're watching the replay later, it's andybounce.com. Very easy. But you can also find his details in the description. Andy, thanks for your time. We kind of up with the time that we allocated. But what else would you say? What would be your top thing that hasn't yet been said that we could leave people with as they think about communicating in a crisis?
Okay, great stuff. The other one would be good question. Would be, if you haven't done yet, so if you're interested in meeting some people you don't normally speak to, maybe it's a salesperson who wants to meet a potential customer, or maybe you want to speak to a colleague who you don't know. When everyone's rattled like they are, Graeme, it's very hard to build rapport and build trust. So what you want to do is, if you're speaking to someone who is in effect a stranger, the thing to do to accelerate trust is to use a middleman or middlewoman, to use an intermediary, what sometimes people call referrals. So if somebody wants to speak to my dad about something, if they go on LinkedIn and look at mutual connections on LinkedIn, they'll see they're connected to me and I'm connected to my dad. So then they could email me and say, Andy, could you do me a favor? I want to speak to your dad. If I set that up for you, what that does is it accelerates trust. It accelerates rapport. And at the time when there's all this noise around, if you try and get through to my dad and he doesn't want to talk to you, he'll just get rid of you quite easily. But if you say, oh, hi, my name's Graeme, your son Andy suggested I give you a call, that accelerates trust. And straight away he'll go, oh, hello, how are you, Graeme? How can I help? So if you haven't used that yet in a strategic way, absolutely use LinkedIn's mutual connections to get to speak to people who don't know you at all or very well. That accelerates trust, that accelerates time, and of course it's miles easier than just hitting strangers.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us on this webinar. Thank you again, Andy, for your time. Now you know why I wanted to speak to Andy, and just cut through the noise, get our communication right, whether it's internal or external, whether it's to our team or to our customers. I don't think there's been more important time than now to get our communication right. So, Andy, I knew it would be a good conversation. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
I've enjoyed it, Graeme. Thank you.
Cheers, everybody. Have a good day.